Yep, fantastic. Oh, we got thumbs up now. All right, I think we're 3 minutes past, so we'll get started. I think a few people are going to join in afterwards, but what we're going to do is we're going to kick off with today's kind of presentation. So as you probably saw from the invite, today's less about Aristotle, the registry, and more about metadata itself as a principle that we're trying to encourage people to kind of take into their own organizations as a way of extracting more value and adding more back to their organization. So today's agenda, we're going to look at a few things. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at what is data, because I think this is a really important place for us to start from, is to get everybody on the same page and understand why data is valuable and what it brings to the organization. We'll have a little look at what metadata is, or a lot of a look at what metadata is. And then we'll start talking about how metadata brings in value to our organization. So to start with, what I want to look at is just kind of firstly acknowledging that we all work with data. Whether or not we know it, everybody's actually really intensely involved with the management of data. And to kind of talk through a couple of examples, what we've got here is we're going to look at one, and it's the Pets in Australia example. But you'll see a couple of other examples are cropping up here. So we've got annual reports. So an annual report is probably one of the most important pieces of data published by private and public sector organizations. We've got dashboards, and more we're starting to see interactive graphics coming online as well. So everybody's working with data, whether or not we know it, and we should be knowing it, but whether or not we know it, data is a part of everybody's involvement in their daily work life now. So I want to look at an example, right? And we're going to pull one of these examples out, and it was really good that we had somebody's pet dog joining us earlier. I want to look at the Pets in Australia survey. So we're not affiliated with the Australian Veterinary Association, but we pulled this one because it's a really good example of public data that everybody can kind of get their heads around. So I saw everybody was kind of throwing some thumbs up emojis. Can you throw a thumbs up emoji if you've got a pet at home? Especially if you've got one nearby, probably causing you trouble on your keyboard. Yeah. So a lot of us have pets. I have pets. I have 2 cats at home that I care about really deeply. And what I've grabbed here is I've grabbed some data out of the Pets in Australia survey, an annual survey that's run by the Australian Veterinary Society, looking at what we do with our pets, what we spend, and how much we care about them. Because I think this is a subject that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And what I want to do is I want to understand, well, in the context of this data about how much we love our pets, what is metadata? Well, there's a couple of things we can immediately pull out of this. So firstly, we want to know what pets do people have and what other kinds of pets do people have. So what we know is we know that people have cats and dogs, they've got small mammals, they've got reptiles, they've got fish. There's quite a lot. Yeah, there we go. So we want to know what kind of pets people have. What we also want to know is why cats are categorized separately to other mammals. Like on this data, and you can see in here, we can see that cats are categorized separately to other mammals. So we've got small mammals and cats separated. Who drew that distinction and why? Like, I think it's because cats are more popular than most other mammals. We've got cats, dogs, and kind of everything else when it comes to pets. So, but where is that recorded, and how do we know what certain things are classified in that category? We want to know who's a pet owner. What qualifies someone as a pet owner? If you've got a household where there's a couple of adults and a couple of children, who qualifies as the pet owner? Is it the person who's responsible for it? Do we give it to a kid and they can kind of take care of it? Like, what do we classify as the pet owner, and who define these categories? Who do we know to trust to define who are pets in Australia? We want to know, there's a question here about household penetration that they've taken from the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So how is household penetration calculated, and why is that important? And then lastly, we want to understand, when was this data collected? So was it collected last year during COVID when we know that pet ownership spiked? Was it from a year earlier? And how does that differ? Was all of this data collected at the same time? Was census data that was used for this collected with other things? And then lastly, how do I find this data? Like, where is this data made available, and why is it important to my organization? Now, it may seem like a really kind of a soft subject here, talking about how much we love our pets and how important they are to our lives. But this survey is actually quite important. So we look at the Pets in Australia database. We look at the Pets in Australia kind of collection that was run. And I want people to think, why was this important? Like, what was like, maybe just drop in the chat, why did I pull this one out as a subject of importance? So the reason why I've picked this one is actually, it wasn't just a soft subject. It was a really open and engaging piece of data we found that was part of a formal submission into domestic cats and feral cats in the Australian environment. It was submitted to Parliament. Like, this was part of a parliamentary inquiry submission that went into from the pet industry, understanding what pets were involved in the Australian economy. This survey was actually funded by, there we go, Pets Provide Mental Health Support. It's actually covered in there, so thank you very much. So what we can see here is that this survey wasn't actually even run by just any old industry. It was run by the entire pet healthcare industry. And we'll look at the scope of that. So industry bodies are actually very interested in knowing, was the data collected as part of the Pets in Australia survey, how valid was it? How well run was this survey? And then we want to look at where the sources of this data came from. So, okay, so we've got all of this pet data. Where has it come from? Well, there was a lot of custom designed questionnaires that adhered to some really good guidelines. So again, I've read through everyone there. Read through everything there. But it also came from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So there was data from census and household level data that was pulled in to understand the amount of pets per household. So what is the scope of data that's being used from federal sources? And also they looked at hobby farms. So one of the pets of interest was birds. One of the reasons why you might have a bird, according to this survey, was for eggs. So they covered that in there, and they were actually comparing hobby farms and pet farmers against industry farmers as well to understand satisfaction and enjoyment from livestock. So what we can see here is what starts from a very soft topic of pets in Australia, all of a sudden is using data sources from a number of federal agencies. It's being utilised by industry, and it's being fed into a formal submission. So the ability for us to understand the quality of this data starts to become much more important. And to kind of tip it off, like, one last interesting fact is that they kind of pull out here that the pet industry is a $13 billion industry. So there's a lot of value in this data. So understanding, as somebody said, like, the ability for our pets to provide mental health support starts to become something real. So we've got some people signed on from a couple of health departments. We've got people coming on from social welfare departments. Knowing that this data is available all of a sudden gives us the ability to go, well, can we track pet ownership over time as an understanding to determine how well people are doing within their communities? Are they coping? Is pet ownership growing? Maybe people are seeking, more mental support from pets. So the idea is that even with a soft topic that's all near to our hearts, the need for metadata becomes quite apparent because it's really important for us to understand certain things about this data. To look a little bit more in depth, we go, well, what do we need to know? So now we're going to move a little bit from our example, and we're going to go into the topic of metadata itself, of things that metadata can provide us. And we'll look at some more examples as we go through, but we're going to look at some examples of how metadata adds value to describing our information. As you can see along the bottom, we've got like a data governance maturity model that we're kind of using here to go look at a low maturity, and we want to build everybody up to understand the need for high maturity metadata by the end. So in our first instance, probably the thing that everybody's most familiar with is the idea of knowing, where is my data? Like, does everybody, again, we'll throw some thumbs up, and we've got some more interactive bits in a sec, but we'll throw some thumbs up. Does everybody know where all of the data across their organization is? Thumbs up for a yes and thumbs down for a no. Like, how is everybody confident they could find all of the data in their organization? Thumbs ups, thumbs downs. We got some happies, some laughs. I don't know if a laugh is a good thing or a bad thing. But generally, I'm seeing a few thumbs up there and a few thumbs down. So most of us, about 50-50, we've got an idea of where the data is coming from and where it's stored. Secondly, we want to go a little bit deeper and go, what does this data mean? So again, we talked about how do we classify our pets, but I think everybody in all of our organizations has things we classify. We classify our customers, we classify the people that we work with, we classify, the suppliers of information, the suppliers of, materials that we use in our organization. So there's a lot of supplier and customer data that we need to be tracking, and services data we need to be tracking. Do we understand what those things mean? How well is this data collected and used? So do we know how it was transformed? So as we saw with our pet example, we had raw data coming in from questionnaires that were run by the Veterinary Society, but we also had ABS data. How were those two packages transformed together to make new data? Can we understand the lineage of that data to say where it's come from and where it's used? So if I started looking at changing data or using a different data source, how does that impact the rest of my collection and the rest of my reports? And then lastly, probably one of the most important things is understanding this idea of the executive understanding of data. Why do we collect data? So one thing that we like to say is data that has no purpose is just trivia. I can get a whole bunch of data about things that people aren't really interested in, and it's probably going to be forgotten and lost. Data that we collect in our organizations has value. And as we saw, one of the biggest pieces of value is it provides insights into those annual reports that we're all required to release. How does that data flow from where it's collected all the way up to that annual report? And what's the importance of it? So we started this example with, some very soft pet survey data, and then we've started to unpack it and gone, the value of this data is understanding how much people are spending on their insurance for their pets, how much they're spending on their healthcare for their pets. All of a sudden, being able to understand those trends becomes very, very valuable across the sector, and very, very valuable from a government perspective, understanding how people are spending their money. So it becomes very, very important to understand why data is being used and why it's collected to help us drive the ongoing use of data, the ongoing collection of data, and also the ongoing management of data. What are we doing to keep data current and up to date? So again, I'm going to pause here because I'd like this to be a little bit interactive. And I'd say, does anybody have any examples of executive metadata in their organizations? Why are you collecting data? Digital health, that's great. Yeah, so digital health is a big one. We need to track healthcare, especially now when we're doing more telehealth, especially now in the pandemic, which I think we're all aware of, is being able to understand how healthcare services are being used, and using it more efficiently becomes really, really important. So yeah, thank you for that. And also vaccinations. I think throw a thumbs up or throw some hands. Who's tracking vaccination data really closely? I know that's one that's close to my heart as well. I think, again, some thumbs up. I think everybody knows about that one. Any other reasons? MS003 forms. All right, you've stumped me on that one. And business disruption. So yeah, so business disruptions and customer loyalty. So yeah, being able to understand, how our customers appreciate our services, being able to understand how well our data is being run, how well our businesses are being run, are all really important reasons. So I guess I'm going to throw, again, a thumbs up, thumbs down one. How well do we think we're collecting our data and tracking it towards those outcomes? Thumbs up for we're doing a great job, or thumbs down? How well do we think we're tracking our data in our organizations and knowing how our data gets from collection all the way through to that final end stage? Everybody's doing a great job. Well, that's good. That's awesome. I'm really glad. I'm very proud of you. Okay, so if we understand that all of this data has value, probably the next thing to understand is, if we know that it's being used for all of these purposes, if we know that we're collecting it for a reason, who needs to be involved in this? So again, I want to look at a little bit of the value chain of where data is used. So again, looking at our Pets in Australia example, looking at some examples here, there's a couple of examples broadly across that data value chain to understand who's using this information. The first people who really are big producers of metadata are the data collection areas. So if you're responsible for collecting data, there's a real need for you to be recording what that data means at the same time. So capturing that metadata in a way that others can use so that they can interpret that data further down the track. Are our surveys being collected correctly? Are we using the same classifications everywhere? It's really important and really valuable. This idea of data transformation. So as we said in our pet example, we've collected all of these sources together. Are we collecting them in the right way? How did we transform them? What are we doing there? The idea of product development. So again, we're moving away from the data and back into that business side, into that conceptual side. We've collected all of this data, we've transformed it, but what's the purpose? What is the final form of the Pets in Australia kind of report going to look like? Do we need to publish it this year? Are there things that we need to change from one year to the next to be able to track, changes in trends? The idea of publication and delivery. So again, data, a lot of the time, there's an audience for data beyond just the business area that's collecting it. We share data a lot. And again, that's why we've picked these public examples of a pet survey. We've picked public examples of annual reports. Every organization has a responsibility to be publishing certain amounts of financial data and certain amounts of performance data to make sure that they're tracking well. Making sure that we understand what that means becomes very, very important when it comes to making that data available. So when we say, our company is doing great, we're meeting all of our metrics, when we say pet ownership is on the rise, what we want to do is understand how is that collected? How is it tracked year on year? Did we do the same thing? And then lastly, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this here, is the idea of data query and support. So we don't just collect data and put it somewhere and then walk away. There is a big component of being able to answer queries about it. So being able to know where the data is, know what the data means, so that when queries come into the organization, they can be actioned efficiently, becomes really important. So we see across this entire value chain, everybody needs to be doing a little bit. And what we want to do is make sure it's easy for people to be involved in that. Now, I've just got a quick question from Ross. How do we assess data quality? We assess data quality by understanding the metadata that's available with it. So assessing quality is a very subjective kind of topic, but the more we know about the data, the more we can do to assess its availability. So there's a couple of formats or a couple of standards that can be used to describe the data quality, and we'll look at a couple of those in a second. So thank you for that segue, Ross. So lastly, what we see over these value chains is there's three things that we kind of need to be aware of as well, just to kind of wrap this one up, is we need systems in place. So we've said software and systems, and it's both. We need to have systems that enable us to track data and track metadata across this value chain, across everybody in the organization. We need to help people with the idea of data governance. We'll talk about that in a second. And then lastly, we need the culture around it as well to get people involved. So to help people know that they can be involved in this process. So what I want to look at now is a really quick example of why we have challenges with this. And I think if you've had a challenge with this one, we've worked hard on this animation. If you've had a challenge like this, throw me a thumbs up to let me know that we're on the same page. So I want to talk about a really brief example of just back and forth between a data collection area who's collecting data from people of interest, from our pet owners, and passing that back to data management to make sure it's of high quality. Now, often a lot of this data is being passed around our organizations internally as Word documents and Excel files, and they get passed back and forth to our other areas. So we've passed our Word document off to data management. We've packaged it up as an email. We've sent it off. They're going to make some comments and they send it back. So we're starting to see a back and forth of these documents. We're starting to see different versions happen. But eventually a challenge is going to happen once we start bringing more people in. So if our data management area starts to bring in other analysts who have specific expertise into this chain, we start to see a problem. I'm going to send my email off. I'm going to package everything up. It's going to get sent off to data management, and then we're going to say, hey, can we get your feedback on how we're performing this? We get feedback from a number of analysts, and all of a sudden we've now got this problem that we call governance by email and document, where we're starting to see multiple conflicting versions of the same information being sent around or stored on shared drives. So is this a common problem that people have seen? Yeah, lots of thumbs up. And it leads to frustration. So all of a sudden we're getting this problem of everybody trying to send everything around, and it leads to a couple of really clear, really common problems. So when we have this governance by email and document, we're sending documents around, and one of the biggest challenges is we don't know what the authoritative version is. What's the most current one? Because of that, it starts to lead to these silos. If I wanted to try and manage that problem, I start working with fewer and fewer people. I'm going to engage with a smaller audience and make sure that I can tackle that. And once it's finished, then I'll pass it out to other people. That leads to this business data IT separation that we've seen is really, really common. And then lastly, once it gets to a big enough problem, we start to see this really common idea of building platforms or building really customized solutions to track our specific problem. And that all leads to this eventual cascade of issues where we don't know what the single source of truth is. We don't know where to go because we've got multiple documents, multiple conflicting systems, multiple silos. It means we can't get that engagement from different areas. And eventually we start to see this lack of scalability. We have these custom platforms and these custom solutions that prevent us from taking this across the entire organization, getting everybody involved. So that leads to a really easy question, and this one leads back to Ross's question of how do we build trust and assess the quality of our content? So there's 4 easy things we can do, and we're going to run through some examples of this. And the first one is we record key concepts. We help understand what our business means when it comes to data. We centralize where that exists so people can find it easier and manage it in a more effective way. We publish this content so others can be aware of it. And again, we say publish because we are looking at the existence of public and non-public information. So we want to make sure everybody who has access to this data can understand it effectively. And then lastly, we want to encourage that collaboration. So we want to get people working together, making sure that they're all working on the same versions at once. So the first step is recording those data assets. So every piece of data across the organization that we've got, we want to track. We don't want to store it all in a single place. Everybody has their own reasons for storing data in the places that it exists, but we want to keep a record of that. So we want to say, what is the name of this data? Where was it collected? How was it collected? What format is it? There may be only particular formats that I'm interested in. And then lastly, who has the permission to the data? So we're really talking about data that lives somewhere else. So somebody else owns the data, but we want to know what data is available across the entire organization and whether or not I even have access to it, because there may be processes for it. I may have to go through, an authorization process to see what data is available, but I still want to know what's available there, what we have as an asset, as a corporate asset. Secondly, and probably the most important thing, is capturing those concepts associated with our data assets. So we know what our data is called, we know what it collects, we know information about who collected it and when, but what we want to understand is what all the columns, all the rows, all of the fields in this data correspond to. What do they mean? And this is one of those areas where metadata becomes very, very important for understanding how different data relates. And we can break this down as 3 basic questions about the data. And this is something that we try and encourage everybody who uses the Aristotle Metadata Registry to understand is, if I can answer these 3 questions about my data, I've got a really good grasp on what's available in my organization. So I want to know, who is this data about? What does this data record? And how is it stored? So if I can get those 3 things, I'm doing quite well. And there's an interactive component coming up again, so be prepared. Okay, so I'm going to use one example from our pet survey. And we're going to look at the top reasons why people got a dog. Why did you get a dog? Was one of the questions on this survey. So we're going to look at the who. Firstly, we're going to go who. So who is this data about? Top reason for getting a dog. Who is this data about? Can anybody take a suggestion in the chat or just yell it out? Dog owners. Any other suggestions? I think Abby said dog owners, so we'll give it to Abby. The answer is correct. The answer is it's about dog owners. So it's not about dogs, which somebody kind of said last time I gave this presentation. They said dogs. It's like, no, it's actually about the owners. We want to know about that owner. What reason did they collect this information, or what reason did they get a dog? we've got that what. So what information are we collecting? Again, we'll kind of throw this one to an interactive one. The reason they got a dog, yes. So the reason they got a pet. And then lastly, we want to look at, oh, my image has disappeared. There's a little idea. There's a little light bulb image there. And then lastly, the how is there was a 2020 kind of collection of categories that they've used across all of the different pet types to understand why people were getting pets. One of the reasons for birds, as I said, was to get eggs. You know, it's not a valid reason to get a dog. I mean, you could try and get eggs from a dog, but it's not going to work. But, you know, it's useful to know that everybody's kind of being graded the same. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at the same example, but this time we're going to look at cats. So again, interactive portion. Who are we collecting information about this time? And we're waiting for an answer. So yes, so again, somebody's kind of jumped in and said cat owners. So the answer is cats, or sorry, cat owners. So we want to know how cat owners felt. But the information that we're collecting about cat owners is actually the same as it is about dogs or dog owners. So we wanted to know, why did they get a pet? And we're using the same code. So the reason that this becomes important is when we start tracking different data across different data sets and trying to understand those similarities. So we know, looking at these two data sources, why has my light bulb not shown up? There should be a light bulb in the center there. That's a kind of an idea, a reason for getting a pet kind of icon. So we know the reason and how we categorized it is the same. And what we know is that in one instance, it's about dog owners. In the second, it's about cat owners. So this information helps me understand where all of this data is collected, how is it used in particular collections. So is it used for cats? Is it used for all owners of pets? And also it helps me understand how this data is used across time. So we want to understand, you know, was this collected in the same way as 2019? If we wanted to track pet trends going up or down, or understand how pet ownership has changed, we want to be collecting it in the same way. And by using a system that allows us to understand the differences, we can look at how data is changing over time and understand how we collect data is changing over time to make sure our reports are really accurate. So I guess the big question is, how do we get started? And I always like to talk about something other than product, because product is easy to talk about. The easiest thing is the tools we have available to us already. So we're very big on standardization here in Aristotle, at Aristotle Metadata. We like to encourage people to use, you know, really cohesive formats. So the standard that we just looked at with the who, what, and the why is a standard called ISO 11179, and it's not super important to understanding, more than it is just understanding that we need to ask those questions about data. What we've done is we've published some really useful Excel templates that are available online to help people start doing this today. So most people have Excel or a spreadsheet type format available, and we're publishing templates to help people start to get a handle on this, because we need to start making first steps. And we'll talk about metadata implementation after this. But the idea is, if we can use machine readable formats, it's easy for us to transmit to other systems later on. We want to make sure we provide as much help text around how people can do this themselves. And we want to use standard terminology, because if we're using standard terminology, then what that means is that everybody across the organization can understand it, and everybody across different organizations can understand it. We heard from one or two people earlier today who were talking about, you know, they're using Aristotle in their own areas. Because we're using standard terms, we can start to transfer that knowledge and improve the understanding of our data. The other things that we want to look at is centralisation. So we used the Excel example, and now we're going to use a little bit of a few Aristotle examples, but we want to talk about systems and processes that we need more than any one given tool. Because what we need to start doing is we need to start collecting all of this in a single place. So as we saw, all of these different areas need to be managing their information. We need to be managing our questionnaires and our glossaries and our frameworks and our data in a centralized place so that everybody can find it. Centralization becomes really, really important the more we start doing this, and the more we want to start getting value out of our data. So it's really valuable not only for us, but for other people who are trying to see the impact of our data. If we didn't provide these definitions, that PED survey wouldn't have had as much impact when it was tabled in Parliament. It would have been, well, we don't know who's collected this data. We don't know what it stands for. We don't know how to interpret it. By making sure that metadata was centrally available from the data sources where they got information for the report and for their own systems, they were able to produce a much more cohesive, much more impactful report when they made that submission. From a usability perspective, what we want to look at is a few basic things. So we need usability. So Excel's fantastic and it's accessible. So we want to make sure that we can use tools that people have that are available to them today. What's even better than Excel is web-based platforms. So we want to make sure that platforms are available no matter what device people are on and no matter how they're accessing this information. So making sure that they've got platforms that they can use, whether or not they're working remotely, whether or not they're using their home computer or their work computer, becomes really, really important. We want to encourage this idea of self-discovery, and this has been one that we've seen is really successful here at Aristotle, but again, it's more about being able to enable the functionality. When people are able to find data and find metadata that they understand, it promotes them going back to the activity. They want to do it themselves. If they can see great examples, it gives them something to work from. So platforms that enable self-discovery and self-use become really powerful for making other people want to get involved in metadata as well. And the idea, again, that we're trying to promote here is that it's not just about one section of us being involved in metadata. Metadata is an activity for everybody across the organization to be involved in. We want to talk about that peer learning and communication. Again, we have a very, very big focus on making sure all of our training is available through sessions like this, making sure that it's available for anybody at any time. And you need to do that in your organization because, again, everybody works different hours. Like lots of government agencies are working across multiple cities. We've got organizations that are working internationally, making sure that people are able to access information on their own time and learn from their peers in their offices becomes really, really important instead of waiting for, registered training sessions. And then we want to use standards. So again, this is one that's been really powerful for us, especially in today's workforce where we see people move more often. You come to this conclusion where you're starting to see that people don't stay in jobs for 20 or 30 years like they used to. People are staying in jobs for 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or even less in some cases, especially early in their career. By using a standards-based design, people get up to speed really quickly and they have a transferable skill set they can take away. What we're trying to do is give people a skill set that they can use wherever they go, whatever tools they have available to them. So making sure that you're using a standards-based platform means that people that come into the organization, and we've started to see that with Aristotle, people shift around organizations and are taking their knowledge and being ready to go on day one. They hop into the platform, they get a login, and they're ready to start documenting data in their new position or in their new company. We've talked a bit about discovery, and again, this is a really important thing, and I'm just kind of speeding up because we've got a few more minutes left, and I want to give everybody time for questions. Making sure that systems are discoverable becomes really important, and I think, again, tools like Excel and SharePoint are making systems more able to, or making people more able to search across content. But again, we want to bring all that together in a nice user-friendly way and make sure that people can find that content in a really easy fashion. Can they find that information, find information about their data and link between sources so they can see if I'm interested in one data set, can I find another that's related? Can I get that adjacent information? And then lastly, and I think this is most important, is collaboration. So again, it's not about a single person. It's not about just one of us doing this. We're all involved in this. And it means that different areas and different skill sets need to be brought together. The people who are building our glossaries and the people who are collecting our data and the people who are, managing the physical databases themselves all need to work together cohesively to make sure that they're all on the same page and they all track the same data. That means that we need to think about teams and roles and not people. So as we said, people jump around. People can get seconded to different areas. They can go on leave. What we want to try and encourage is metadata is a team sport. Everybody wants to be involved, and we need to give them the tools to do that. We want to track as much of that communication. So why was a definition used in one way? Why did we categorize cats as separately to small animals? What did we track as a small animal? Are fish and reptiles small animals, or are they so special we group them together? Tracking that information becomes really important because we want to understand why certain decisions were made. We want to give teams the ability to securely control their information. So using standardized tools, using standardized platforms, but being able to do it in their own private areas becomes quite valuable because it gives them the space and the security to start working early without the worry of too many people kind of like seeing their content and critiquing it. And then lastly, we want that ability to manage how we transfer control of content. So as we saw, there's an entire value chain of metadata, and what we want to do is make it available, or make systems available that allow people to transfer control. As data moves from one group to another, as it gets endorsed, as it gets used more broadly, we want to allow people to kind of share that content and give ownership over to others who might have the right permissions and authority. I'll just really briefly touch on governance here, because again, we're going to hit the questions really soon. So basically, we want to make sure that all of those decisions are tracked. So we want to make sure that we know who's authorizing these definitions. So who was it that authorized how we collect, satisfaction with pets becomes really valuable, because this builds trust in the content. When I know who's pushing data out, when I know who's published data, it becomes, it gives it more weight. We know that the pet survey was using data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics census to get household data, and that holds a level of trust. I know that data is quite accurate, and I want to know that. So if I know the trust of the data, if I know the quality of the data, it makes it easier for me to understand and promote to others. And lastly, we're going to look at, so I think this is probably the last slide. What we're going to look at here is, second last slide. What we're going to look at here is how we implement it. So again, just in the interest of time, there's a couple of things that we can do early on to get people involved in this process. So like I said, metadata is a team sport. We want to make sure everybody understands what their role is. So we want to build those standards early to make sure everybody's following the same playbook. We want to document that governance to know who's going to be authorizing this content for use in our annual reports, who's going to be authorizing it for use in our collections and our reports that are published. Who's going to be the point of contact for me to understand this content? So again, we've seen this quite effectively across a couple of organizations who use Aristotle, but we want to understand who is the point of contact I can go to for assistance with data governance. And what we've seen is a transition away from our data management areas being the people who are responsible for documenting it and starting to become a service team that helps others build high quality information. People generally want to be helpful and they want their data to have value. Generally, they want it to have the most value. They want their data to be the most important. Very important data becomes very valuable for your careers and for your business units. And we found that as we've built these service teams who help others with their expertise and help others with their governance, that becomes an important part of helping them do their job. Once we've published these high quality content, then we can start that transition to business as usual. So we take really good examples early on, we make them available broadly across the organization to help people understand what quality looks like. And then that's used as a way to encourage people to move to this new business as usual, where metadata becomes an important part of their day. To understand why, and again, we've just kind of dropped this last slide in here, to understand why, this is what we're starting to see. So again, to communicate back why metadata is valuable for your organization, we're starting to see a reduction in time for those service queries. So as we start putting content in a centrally available place, people know where to look for content and they can start doing their own searching, their own Googling across the systems to understand that information. When they do need to make a service desk query, the service desk knows exactly where they can go. They can use their expertise to find information as well. This is generally leading to that increase in productivity that everybody's driving towards, and a reduction in the time spent kind of complying with data standards as well. And the overarching thing is it becomes really easy for people to get involved. And the last slide I'll put up here is basically how do we start? In summary, everybody's kind of made that first step today by coming along. and understanding that it's a task for us all to be involved in. Everybody needs to be involved in this work, and we want to make sure that everybody can feel comfortable in this work as well. We want to start documenting those business concepts, so understanding why data is important and what it means, more than just how it's stored. So it's about understanding why this data is important for my business unit or for the organization as a whole, and developing those those asset registers. So having a clear, consistent way that we record what data is available across the organization becomes really important. And then lastly, using standardized processes. So I'm going to throw up a little promo slide at the end. But ultimately, if we can use machine actionable formats, if we can encourage people to get involved earlier, that becomes really valuable. But what I am going to say is I'd strongly encourage you to go to our website, because we have those two examples there. So we've got our standardized Excel templates that people can use to start building data dictionaries today. But what we've also got is we've started to make the Aristotle Metadata Registry broadly available. So we've got a sign-up page there that you can go to, you can try it out, and you can start seeing what business value you're able to get once you've transitioned from that Excel and email document land into a more rigid, more accessible metadata registry as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause there. I've been talking now for quite a long period of time. We've still got a few minutes left for questions, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up to people who have questions about how they might be interested in getting involved. How do you think you might be able to bring metadata into your organization? Here we go. So we've got a question from Bruce. Bruce has asked, he's got a couple of questions. So trying to set up data analytics consulting squad to enhance each area of his organization. So was there more? Or so what I'd say is, again, like probably the first thing that we'd look at there, Bruce, is looking at ways to help people understand the value of it. So bringing in the right people to say this is important from an organizational perspective, and probably tackling one challenge. What we've seen most effective is taking examples from annual reports and going, can we track this information? Do we know where it's come from? And using that as a prompt to say, how well do we think we understand our data, and what do we think we need to know more of to be able to track our data across the organization? Because the more we don't know about our data, that's where that value comes in. Because if we don't know where to go to find this information, people spend a lot of time having to kind of reinterpret data, and that can lead to either a lot of lost time trying to like redetermine what the data means, and bad decisions being made as well. So hope that answers your question there. I'll leave it for 1 or 2 more minutes, but basically what I'll say is I'll just leave my our closing remarks. So basically, thank you everybody for coming along. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes just to see if there's more questions. And I'd strongly ask you, if you've got questions and you don't have time today, email them through, and we'll be doing a lot of follow-up with everybody as well, just to see, how you enjoyed the talk. If there was things that you weren't able to track, we've recorded the video, as Lauren kind of said. We'll be making an anonymized version of that, so nobody's names will be in it. We'll be making that available online as well, so you can share that with your peers if there's more information you'd like. And you can find the links. We'll be emailing out links to the sign up. So we've got a 6-month trial for the Aristotle registry you can sign up for. And we'll also be emailing links out for that Excel template that we're encouraging people to use as a first step as well. So if there's no more questions, what I'll do is we'll start winding down, because I think it's 5 o'clock and everybody probably needs to get home. We're seeing some applause. That's great. Are there any other questions that people want to ask, or do we want to start signing off? We're not seeing a lot of feedback. We're seeing people drop off.
Hey, Sam, this is Bruce.
Yep. Hey, Bruce.
How's it going? I have a few minutes, but one of the things that I have in my mind is, like, right now with the organizations, at least the example that I'm seeing is that they're not really making good use or have a mature framework on how to think about their data. And so they're lacking metadata, right? And they're lacking the curation and the ability to grasp that information that might be able to help them make better decisions. And so I'm seeing a few groups in our organization where I think, something of this, if we had better information, then we can help each team to develop like a SME layer where they can extract more tooth and nail and collect this information with their data science teams in
Yeah.
order to generate or achieve more savings or value. So that's kind of the realm that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
For our org, and I'm trying to set up like an internal consulting structure for that.
Yeah, I would say, like, from our experience, I think probably one of the best messages to put out there is that everybody's done a great job. I think data and metadata are very challenging fields to kind of get into. And there's a lot of complexity that you can kind of find very, very quickly. So what we try and encourage business areas especially to kind of work with is to understand, like, if you've ever documented anything as a Word document or as an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, you've done a fantastic job of helping people understand your content. And generally going in with a really positive message of saying, show me the awesome work that you've done so far, is a good way to kind of get them along, because not a lot of people have. And again, not a lot of areas have gone to the process of writing stuff down. So anything you can tease out of them and putting that positive spin on it and saying, what have you already got that we can use, becomes a really valuable way of getting that engagement. Because if you explain to people that they're ahead of the curve, that really helps them want to engage even further.
Absolutely, I totally get that. A good entryway. Thank you.
It's okay. Any other questions from people? Quick question: do we have the ability to harvest? Kumar, that's a really, really good question. At the moment, no. So the Aristotle registry itself, so our tool specifically, we're very much focused on getting information from other places. So I've got a really good API, and I'll send you an email after this to talk through some use cases. But we have the ability for other tools to push into Aristotle. Because there's a difference in security, I think, between data architecture and database tools and our metadata registry. What we do is we make it easy for people to get content in, but we can certainly talk through ways to harvest it. If you've got some specific examples, we can talk through how we might pull from those tools into Aristotle. Do we need to ask for access to metadata? That's a really good question, Kylie. Sometimes no. So again, it depends on your organization, and I'll probably follow up with you just to say, with access to metadata, a lot of organizations publish it, so they make it available. So a lot of government agencies, especially, make their metadata available for others to see and use. So again, the ABS is a really classic example of people who are publishing big classifications for others to use and big data sets to use. With regards to your specific organization, what I'll do is I'll reach out to you individually, and if your organization is currently using Aristotle, I'll get you connected. Otherwise, we might have a conversation about what you need to do to get an Aristotle registry at your organization. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think everybody's stopped typing. Everybody's stopped chatting. We're going to sign off, but thank you very much for coming. We'll make sure the recording comes out probably in the next day or two, and you can share it amongst your teams. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and yeah, head over to aristotlemetadata.com to learn more.